All right, so let's get started. We're gonna give some to just Rep Foster and then some to Rep Vella, and then we'll do some to both. They may chime in on each other's answers as well. So this will be a little bit free flowing, as they say. How will the big beautiful bill actually impact people? Congressman Foster to start.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's the biggest, by far the most important single thing is taking the healthcare away from 17 million Americans. You know, that's sort of a breathtaking number. You know, that's roughly the number that got healthcare from Obamacare. Just, you know, back when I started politics, that was the issue. Should we do something about all the people who are uninsurable due to pre-existing conditions? And we got rid of that with Obamacare, and over time, roughly 15 million people, I think more than that, got insurance who never had it before. We're now going to be going back and losing health care coverage for roughly 17 million Americans. And you know, if you're not one of them, you're probably going to see your rates go up as well, because when people become uninsured, they show up at emergency rooms. All right, and the hospitals have to cover them and give them at least emergency care, and the fact that they don't show up in emergency rooms until they have severe medical problems, instead of the sort of routine medical care that would have prevented the severity, you know, costs our whole system a lot more money, and ultimately that has to be paid with people with insurance, and that drives up everyone's insurance rates. And so even if you're not one of those 17 million, you're gonna see that. Also, the cuts to food assistance are going to be huge for many people. I think 3 million people are going to just lose the benefits. And these are most of them working poor. They're not people who are not working. There will be stronger work requirements put into these, but a lot of the people who will lose, you know, they can't, you know, there's a big range of people's ability to work. A lot of people have some level of disability and can't really work, and a lot of them are going to be the ones that will be suffering for having the benefits taken away from them. You know, that's a long discussion about why that is, but if you visit, you know, food pantries or just talk to people who are around here throughout Illinois, the people that are taking these benefits are ones that really need it. But when I talk to some of my Republican colleagues, particularly from some of the southern states, they say, you know, I've got counties in my district where 2/3 of the people are on disability. Okay, and that's why they think it's just massively fraudulent. Maybe there's actually a difference around the country, but they really think that a lot of the people applying for benefits are fraudulent. I don't feel that way when I look at who's in line at food pantries and getting, which they need in addition to things like SNAP. That's a difference, and maybe that's one of the reasons I'm a Democrat. There are lots of other things that are going to be hurting people. You know, the tariffs are one of the things that are not directly in the big beautiful bill, but that is something that is really making life rough for so many of the businesses around this district. And so we'll get into that, I think, if we have a tariff question. But that's the most important single things that people are going to be feeling about this. I'd say one more thing is energy costs. You know, as you all know, you know, President Trump said he was going to cut everyone's energy bills by half. Right, in his first year in office, your electric bills, your heating bills would be going down by a factor of 2. Well, you know, gas is no cheaper today than it was when he took office. Where you're seeing, I know, over in McHenry County, electric rates went up 45%. Okay, and I think you're not in that bad shape here, but it's going to be going after everyone. You know, and a lot of that's because he's busy changing all the rules so that all these data centers get to suck a huge amount of power off the grid, and they're going to outcompete, they're going to outbid people, and it's going to drive up everyone's electric rates. And so that's the sort of, just another example where he's tilting the rules to take money away from ordinary working families and put them into the pockets of the people, the billionaires who own the data centers and things like that. so that there are a lot of battles to be fought here, and the energy bills and just inflation, which is another one of his unfulfilled promises. He said he was going to bring prices back to where they were, before Biden. I haven't seen any prices going down yet, and certainly inflation is continuing to nick people's paychecks, and so this is it's another disappointment about this. I suppose I'm supposed to finish up in 2 minutes on each of these. I think I've blown it, so I'll wait.
That was a big one, so that was okay. Rafael, did you have anything else to add related to the federal budget cuts?
Well, there's going to be, I assume there's going to be just questions about individual things, but I mean, overall, our budget was predicated on the idea that we were going to have cuts. So we did actually cut some stuff out of state budget. We couldn't cut enough because we're going to be losing billions and billions of dollars that was going to come from the federal government, isn't anymore. So overall, just from a macro level, it's hurt the state of Illinois. It's hurt the state of Illinois bad.
Thank you. And I think we've got a couple questions about impacts on election security and our elections, executive orders from the president, funding cuts. If both of you could please speak to how we can make sure our upcoming elections are fair and accurate, and what is your position on what's being done thus far?
Yeah, well, look, the best single thing you can do is be an election judge. All right, we have a system that's actually pretty hard to hack. It's based on having, polling locations in each community, and the election judges come mostly from that community. They know the people that show up, and they know that there's not massive voting fraud because these are the people that they know when they show up. And you have people, ideally from both parties, being election judges, and they see and they see that things are done fair and square in their precinct. And then if they have questions about how the votes are being tabulated, they can go online and look at the county website and see, was my precinct being reported correctly? And then if they're really paranoid, they can get out their spreadsheets and check the calculation to make sure that all the precincts are being added up properly. And so it's actually pretty hard to hack that as long as citizens pay attention to what's happening in their precinct. Now, the other issue that's come up again and again is vote by mail. The president is now threatening or issuing executive orders to ban vote by mail, which he cannot do. It turns out if he actually read the Constitution that the president can't make the rules. Individual states make the rules for this, and states have been having vote by mail for decades, and it's been studied whether it's a massive source of fraud, and it's not. Okay, the military kind of has to vote by mail, because they're not going to be able to come back home, and if you believe the military have a right to vote, you're going to have some vote by mail. And so that's one of the things where you just have to, as a scientist, I look at the facts, and if people studied it and saw a lot of fraud in vote by mail, I could be persuaded that it's not a good thing for our democracy, but that's not the case. It's, it's a serious crime to apply for a ballot when you're not entitled to one. And from time to time they catch people at it, and it doesn't end well for them when that happens. And as a result, there's not a lot of vote by mail fraud. And I think that's a bad idea that the president's come in, because it discriminates against people that have a hard time getting to the polling place. And so when a big part of what the president is doing, frankly, is threatening Social Security, he's threatening Medicare. And a lot of the people who have trouble getting to a polling thing are people who benefit from Social Security and Medicare. And so that maybe his political people are telling him it's a good thing if those people don't show up. The people that want to defend Medicare and Social Security make it hard for them to vote, because they may not vote for him after he does what he's threatening to do to those programs. So,
I guess I think of it. I try to think of everything as local as possible, because again, I'm Rockford and Belvidere. I know my county clerks. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat. I've talked to them. I know that they're not partisan, really. What they are is they want the best election possible. They want the fairest election possible. If there's any question about any of it, and I've been there when they've counted votes. I had my first election, I only won by 200 votes. We were there with them in person counting votes. I've met their workers. They're all there. There is no, I have not seen a conspiracy of any kind. And the longer I'm in, especially in state government, which is who controls the elections, state government, the longer I realize that none of us have the time for the conspiracy. We're not, we are there, most of the people who are there are not getting paid enough. And they're there because they want to do a good job. So getting to know your elected officials, the county clerks, getting to know your poll watchers, getting to know your people who are there when you're casting your ballot and who are counting the ballots. That's the best way to feel better about your elections, because once you do, you'll realize that we have some of the most fair elections in the world. And that's one of the things we've been doing for a long time, and we do a good job at it.
Yeah, and one thing actually I do agree with the president and many Democrats and Republicans is we got to finish getting rid of all the electronic voting machines. We need a paper trail on all of our ballots. And that's something that we've almost completely gotten rid of in this country. They're a very small percentage, including I think nothing in Illinois, does not have a paper trail so that you can see your ballot on a piece of paper before it gets entered. And that's a big deal, because if there are any questions about it, if all you have is, well, we ran the software and this is what the software said, that's not the same as let's go back and read the paper trail and have a human being that we trust look and count those ballots. And so that's a good thing that we've done to strengthen the system we have.
And as an election judge, I can tell you, that specifically people with disabilities often use the touchpads, but there is always a printed record that comes with that, and early voting often it's a touchpad with a paper signature. So that does definitely happen. Just one last question on voting. People are concerned about the SAVE Act, Congressman, and that is the one where it would be requiring the birth certificates at the voting places. Can you please speak to that one and what your position is on that?
Yeah, well, the SAVE Act had very strong, this is part of the narrative that there are all these people who are, non-citizens or somehow, or they're voting multiple places. And, the general idea of having to show some sort of identification when you get registered to vote is something I'm okay with, and that's the way it works in Illinois. You can't just sort of walk in and say, here's where I live, I want to vote. You have to actually present ID once to get onto the voter rolls. And what you'd have to do under the SAVE Act is just every time you show up to vote, you have to show up with an extensive set of things, and you'd have to be able to produce, your birth certificate, any sequence of marriages and divorces. You'd have to, and when you have a name change, you'd have to go and dig up your old divorce certificate from some guy that you're trying to forget about. And so this is, this is just, it went way overboard. And I think, when it passed the House, I think a lot of the members of the House who voted for it said, boy, I hope this never gets signed into law. And I think it's not, because it
still has to go in front of the Senate. It's possible that it will move forward. So that's good that you voted no, and thank you for that update. I think we're going to go to a state-focused issue. I guess we could go to are there any updates on the Stellantis plant reopening? Maybe go into a little more detail if you have it.
Sure.
From both of your positions.
So I've been working with the congressman and as many people as possible to get that done in the last 6 years. I have passed 3 pieces of legislation. One was called the REV Act, which is an electric vehicle bill. Another one was about hybrid vehicles. Another one was about manufacturing, to incentivize them to come, because in this area, what used to be the Chrysler plant and now is the Stellantis plant is a key cornerstone of making sure we have growth here. Okay, and we've been close a couple times. And again, I don't want to keep laying this in the federal government, but we had electric vehicle incentives, and we had money that was supposed to come in to help with growth at the Stellantis plant, and that went away in this last election. So we've had that shift. We've been working with the Stellantis company, because the one thing that they tell me, and I talk to them usually on a bi-weekly basis, is they love our workers. They love this area. They love the location. They love everything. They're ready to go. It's just they got to figure out if it's going to be an internal combustion engine vehicle or a hybrid vehicle or an electric vehicle. So what I believe is they're going to start off with an internal combustion vehicle and then move on to a hybrid vehicle. They were smart in that they were the only company, they're the biggest car company in the world, so they don't move as fast as I would like. But they were smart in that they built a platform that will allow them to build multiple kinds of cars on the same platform. So electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and internal combustion vehicles on the same platform. So they'll be able to switch them in and out, which is great. And if you ask me for a time, I can guess. There's rumors. It's all rumors. They're a huge corporation. Again, they have three main offices. One's in Turin, Italy. One's in somewhere in France, and one's in Michigan. They have to all come together. I'm thinking that shovels will be in the ground at the beginning of next year, and people will be back to. And my understanding is people could very well be back to work, actually making cars there after about a year and a half of redoing it. So anybody who used to work or does work in the UAW plant right now, or what used to is waiting, they have pretty much gutted that place. So we're gonna have to put new machines in and really kind of update the electronics and stuff. And I know that from anecdotal evidence, there are people out there starting to look at what needs to be done. And I think we're in a very good place right now.
And yeah, you're right. It was really just all hands effort to get the deal that we thought we had put together at the end of the last administration. And it was, Eric Sorensen and I made sort of pests of ourselves to the members of the Biden cabinet that had a say in this. And we would go and we'd sit down and camp out in the White House until we got our meeting, and then we'd just tell them, look at, Joe Biden was going around giving all these speeches about how he supports American workers and American union jobs and everything else, and then they were citing all of these factories down in southern right-to-work states, frankly, and we gave them hell about that, and they heard it. And I was told that in every cabinet meeting when they go around in the Biden administration, when they came around to Gina Raimondo, who's running commerce, who we're mainly focusing on, that she'd say, okay, you got to do something for Belvidere. And the president came out here and he delivered. And the UAW, I was actually really proud of the union solidarity there, because the UAW has dozens, probably 100 locals all over the country. And they all said, look, we understand what's happened to Belvidere, and their number one or two negotiating demands is we want a future for Belvidere. And they didn't have to do that. They could have said, we're going to prioritize other aspects of the deal, but that was high on their list. And that's and Stellantis has indicated that they intend to honor that, but we'll see. I don't want to discourage what you said, but I have grown a little skeptical of promises from Stellantis.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We've got a couple questions about Social Security, Congressman. So I am glad the Social Security Fairness Act was passed. Thank you. But how did Congress decide to only make it retroactive 1 year? And then there's another one just about how do you plan to protect Social Security and Medicare?
Yeah. Well, the big thing is it's a single bill that would solve the problems that we've been facing for a long time. It's called the Social Security 2100 Act. And what it does a number of things. It makes an adjustment. Right now nobody pays taxes above some number, like they keep moving around. It's like $150,000. So if you're a billionaire, you pay taxes on your first $100,000 or $200,000 of income, and then the rest of your hundreds of millions of dollars of income don't pay Social Security tax. If you fix that single aspect in the law, that alone is almost enough to just make FICA taxes apply to all income. That fixes the majority of the problem with the long-term stability. And then there are other things that the Social Security 2100 bill, another big problem is that the cost of living adjustment is not really right for seniors. There's really two costs of living, at least two, that you have to think about. There's the one for the average American, and then there's the one for seniors who tend to spend more on things like drugs and other things that cost more. So the effective inflation rate is higher for seniors than it is for the rest of Americans, and our cost of living adjustment should reflect that, and it doesn't, and that would be fixed by the Social Security 2100 Act. which, again, sadly, it's sort of been a partisan thing, frankly, that I think that all Democrats are signed onto it, and I think we may have one or two Republicans, but that's it, and that's not enough to get it passed. And the problem is that this will result in the very wealthy paying more money, and the very wealthy donors of the Trump administration and many Republicans in Congress just don't want to have that. That was not why they contributed to these candidates, and they expect the Republicans to to fight against that stuff. This isn't a new fight. We're having, I think, the 90th anniversary of Social Security. Just I think this month, and we were at a recent celebration of it, actually just this morning, and so I remember my mom worked in for Senator Paul Douglas back in the 1950s, and she said back in the 1950s that the Republicans would come up every couple of years. They'd come up with a new scheme to get rid of Social Security, and then later Medicare, which they are also trying to. Privatization is the latest thing. The Trump Secretary of Treasury, a guy called Scott Bessent, recently said that their proposals having to do with stuff you don't want to think about was actually just a backdoor to get to privatize Social Security. It's really interesting that he made the mistake of admitting what they were all planning to do. And so that's it's been the fight of generations, and it's unfortunately going to continue, because those are programs people paid into and deserve to have them survive. There are ways to do that. There's enough money in this country to provide a dignified, end of life and retirement for people, and we should just do it.
I agree with Congressman. We have nothing to do with Social Security or Medicare, but there's a social contract you have with the generation before you. They took care of you. It's your job to take care of them. And getting rid of these and trying to privatize them is just not going to do the job. So I just want to thank Congressman Foster for fighting for this stuff, because it is one of those things that I worry about, right? When I get to that age, I want to make sure that I'm taken care of. Not to be selfish, but we all think about that, right? And I also think about my parents and my grandparents who are on Social Security. And if that's taken away from them, what's going to happen to them? And so it's a personal thing I think for all of us. So I think they deserve as much fight as we can give them to make sure that they're taken care of.
And the other thing that's happened right away is that Trump and his doges have gone and fired the people in Social Security who actually answer the phones if you have a problem with your check being delivered. Social Security is pretty amazing. In those 90 years, they have never ever missed a payment, but there have been lots of problems with incorrect amounts or this or that. And in the past, it's been possible to get someone on the phone or to go into a meeting, and guess what? The Doge said, hey, what are these people? We'll replace them with computer programs. Let's fire them all. And they fired a big fraction of the staff who answer people's questions and deals with people's problem in Social Security and Medicare. And it's one of the indirect ways. And they say, oh, we didn't cut it. We just cut the wasteful staff that help people with problems. Okay, but that's it's part of the game plan.
Thank you. The call-in has been restored. We understand it is still very long wait times. And we do also want you to be aware that if you are having problems with a federal agency, you can reach out to our office and we can help you. We have recovered over $3 million in federal funds just since the beginning of the year from federal agencies. So please do reach out. This is a question that's focused on transit for Rep. Vella. I would like an update on the cost and usage of money for transportation, and particularly the RMTD Boone Council Teen Age Center for the disabled.
That's a good question. So right now in Illinois, there's a big transit debate. More trains, less trains, more money for PACE and the stuff in the city and in the collar counties, and more money hopefully for downstate, right? So we have been in negotiations trying to find money for all that stuff. So money for the train to go from Rockford to Chicago, money for more busing. And I've been focusing on the Teen Age Center money. There is going to be a transit budget decision before, so we go back to session again in October. It's called veto session. In veto session, the big thing they're talking about is transportation. And what I've learned down there is when Chicago needs something, I can jump on and get stuff for us when they get something. So for instance, when McCormick Place went in, the reason that in Rockford there's what used to be the Metro Center is because that got tacked on to that. So the idea I'm going to have is RMTD and the Keen Age Center. I'm going to try to find as much busing as possible, money for that if possible, and it is there, sitting there, and I think I can get it. That's the fight we're in right now. And to go back to transportation and to the Metro stuff and the train, we are moving forward. We have money set aside. We are clearing off the tracks right now in Belvidere and in Rockford, which is my district. We have put aside where the stations are going to be. They're currently in the process of showing us what they're going to look like. But we have run into two issues. One is federal funding, and the other is we just found out that the Bears are going to be moving to Arlington Heights. It sounds like so, and they're right on a metro station, which kind of slows the things down a little bit. But I still feel we still have a plan of starting service in 2027.
And I want to say one thing, just, the state of Illinois gets accused of being inefficient and so on, and badly run and in debt and so on. And there's an interesting fact that not everyone's aware of, which is that every year Illinois loses between 20 and 40 billion dollars because we pay a lot more in federal taxes than we get back in federal spending. So in Illinois, for example, for every dollar of federal taxes paid by citizens of Illinois, we get back only about 75 cents of spending from the federal government. And other states, particularly the low population rural states, the states in the Sun Belt, make out like bandits. For example, New Mexico, for every dollar of federal taxpayer money that they pay, they receive $2.40. All right. And so the problem is, and that's been documented to be happening ever since 1970. So just imagine 20 billion to 40 billion a year, every year since 1970. If we would have taken that money and put it in a rainy day fund, instead of write this check every year to the Sun Belt and the rural low population states, then the balance in that rainy day fund would be over $1.5 trillion today. Okay, and if we have a rainy day fund with $1.5 trillion, you'd have easier budget discussions.
Yes, we would.
And there wouldn't be a question of, okay, how are we going to pay for the metro? There would be, it would just, and so anytime you hear Illinois attacked for being, corrupt and inefficient and all this sort of stuff, just give us our $1.5 trillion back, and then we'll discuss who's in badly run financially. And so that's something that it's actually, the guilty party there is the United States Senate. What happens if you look at the spending formulas, whether they be highway spending formulas or affordable housing tax credits, because we get screwed on both the tax side and the spending side. And these formulas are just outrageous. That, for example, when we had our internet, the internet, during COVID, there was money put in to get internet connectivity to everyone. And there was a rural program, one that was mostly rural, but that program, if you said, okay, that's fine, it was cooked up in the Senate, fine. And then you say, what's the formula? The formula is that every state gets the same allocation, all right? Not per person, the same, every senator gets their own allocation is the way it mounts. The only place that makes sense is in the United States Senate. And so when stuff like that happens, it's the large population states that get rooked again and again. And Illinois, New York and California get worse than we have, but New York gets bailed out because they have all the Wall Street tax money, and California gets bailed out because they have all the Silicon Valley tax money, and states like New Jersey and Illinois get hit worse than anyone, and we don't have the way to recover. So that is the source of Illinois' pain, and my apologies for all the pain you have to go through, because you have to distribute that pain down to everyone in Illinois when we're getting rooked that badly.
Thank you. The next question is about redistricting. Will Illinois be redistricting to counter the Texas redistricting, just like Gavin Newsom is proposing to put on the California ballot for his state's voters?
Well, I would say I'm not in charge of that myself. However, I heard nothing of that sort. I think I was there when we redistricted 5 years ago. And I think it's a fair map. It's a map that's here. I don't foresee anybody wanting to change that map. And this is not a game in any way, shape, or form. But what's happening down in Texas is they're trying to they're trying to play games, right? They're trying to change the rules before the election, try to get their votes into the places they want to get their votes in. I'm not a big fan of that. So I wish we would all just sit and let our ideas win or lose, depending on if they're good or bad. It shouldn't be about playing games with the maps. But that's my belief.
Yeah, and well, Illinois redistricted, after the census, and the rule is in the Constitution, you have a census, and then you change the maps, okay, every 10 years. And now Texas is deciding, oh no, well, we're going to go and do it like now because Trump ordered them to, and for no other reason. It's really outrageous, and I'm not sure what the right response is. No, I know what the right response is, which is to go to fair redistricting. There's a piece of legislation that when Democrats were, in charge of the House that we passed called H.R. 1 that fixed so many of the problems that plague our elections. The amount of money that gets poured into the unfair redistricting. The long list of things were going to be fixed, but of course that gets blocked because you need a large number of Republicans in the Senate, particularly to go along with that, which they were not going to do, because frankly they benefit from this system.
Thank you. The next question is about the IRS free filing, which has been removed. What are you going to do, Congressman Foster, to restore that?
Yeah, well, if you look back, that was one of the first things I picked up. If you look at, there's something called the Autofill Act of 2010, right after I entered, or maybe 2009 actually, right after I entered Congress. I realized that in most countries, the government has a lot of the information that they need. If you have simple salaries, you paid your FICA tax. If you have money in the bank or with your financial advisor, they report to the federal government all of your income from your investments. And if that's all that's really in your finances, the government has everything they need to know your taxes. And so in most countries, what that means is that you go to the government website, you say, okay, here's what the government knows about you, and you say, yep, that looks correct, here's your taxes. You download the form, you print it out, sign it, mail it in, and that's your taxes. All right, and that applies to something like 80% of the people in the United States could have just that simple an experience. All right, and even though we have a complicated tax code, if the government has the information, that's the taxes are straightforward. And so that was what I have been attempting to do for a long time, in a partnership actually with Elizabeth Warren, who is also, well, back then she was, I guess, just a professor who also thought this was a great idea. Now she's a senator who's been one of my partners in this fight. And so we actually got the pilot program that was tremendously popular among people. That when they tried it, they rolled it out in a number of states. And to just say, okay, we're going to have the government do most of the work for collecting your information. So everyone has this like shoebox full of the little stubs from your financial advisor and your pay stub. That doesn't have to happen. That can be done automatically. And so the fact that we came this close, my guess is that the Trump administration looked at that and said, this is a popular program that President Biden rolled out. We don't want that to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to kill it, then we're going to bring it back and brand it with, put the Trump family logo on it, and then claim they invented it and roll it back out, because it is a tremendously popular thing. And it saves everyone time, it saves everyone money. And so, I can't predict success on this. I did mention it when I had my introductory phone call with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who's really in charge of this. He's an interesting guy, but he didn't exactly bite on this. So we have to see. I don't want to predict success, but this was overwhelmingly popular, and from time to time, that's been enough to get reversals of the administration's decisions on things.
Thank you, Congressman. This one is very specific to Vella. How is progress on Tier 2?
Oh, well, it's going well. So I'm on in the House, we do a lot of what's called working groups. So you get together people who are from different parts of the state, and you try to fix. So Tier 2 is complicated, right? We've broken it up into, so there's Chicago's city police and fire, you have TRS, which is the teacher's pension, you have downstate, the IMRF stuff, and you also have local municipal stuff, police and fire and that kind of thing. We had a bill that was proposed. It didn't get called in this last election. It was not. There's a lot of different people who have different ideas about what's the right thing to do. And because Illinois is as diverse as it is, Chicago is their own beast, right? They have not, over the course of a long period of time, they have not paid into their pension like they should. Most of the downstate communities have, but some of them have gone through some rough periods and are not as funded as they should be in some of their respects. Some are. So Rockford, for instance, would be in a different position, let's say, than Naperville, right? Just because they've got different resources. So we're still meeting. We're getting close. I'm not sure that there are some people who want to move tier 2 to tier 1, which is a much higher, more people call it Cadillac pension. That's going to be hard considering the cost. But I think adding on to the current tier 2 and bringing it up to something that is livable and that is better than Social Security and that provides a fair and equitable and dignified retirement for those especially who have gone through not getting paid enough, put their lives in danger, put themselves in danger, been away from their families. I think that's the fair thing to do, and I think we're getting very close to that right now.
Thank you so much. Now, this one is just for Congressman Foster. We've got a series of questions related to foreign funding and the war in Israel. I'm going to pick a few of these, and then if the individual wants to ask more questions, we can set up an individual meeting. At what point does foreign aid to countries like Ukraine and Israel become unacceptable to you? And then the other question that I think is, will you ask your fellow Democrats and Republican government under Trump to investigate the deaths of American citizens in the West Bank?
Yeah, well, first off, the whole situation in Gaza is it's unacceptable. It is, it is a crime against humanity. It is, I believe that Israel had a right to defend itself after October 7th. That was a horrific thing. But, we're now in a situation where the casualty ratio, the number of people that have died on October 7th versus the number since then, it's like more than 50 to 1. And that's not any reasonable response anymore. And I voted against the military appropriations bill, for many reasons, including the fact that it did not place restrictions on what Israel is doing with its weapons, including many that are provided by the United States. All right, and I lay a lot of the guilt for this, frankly, at the feet of Bibi Netanyahu, who is the leader there. He has, over time, systematically destroyed everything that I used to admire about Israel. His assaults on the rule of law, his complete disrespect for international laws, including the Geneva Conventions on transferring populations into areas that you've captured by force. If you go read the Second Geneva Convention, to which both Israel and the United States are signatories, it says very clearly you cannot transfer population into areas that you have taken over by force, which is exactly what they've been doing for decades in the West Bank and are now threatening to do again. There's recent reports that they're actually trying to negotiate to transfer the population of Gaza into South Sudan. Okay, this is ethnic cleansing in its purest form. And I have no idea how true those are, but they're plausible given some of the statements. One of the most horrifying things is one of the members of Netanyahu's cabinet was threatening the Gazans with nuclear weapons. Okay, and then I guess one of the questions was also about Ukraine, which is it's a separate, very different issue with me. But I'm a physicist, and there's a certain amount of guilt for nuclear weapons, for physicists introducing nuclear weapons into the world, and so one of the things that I think is most significant about Ukraine is that Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in return for a guarantee of territorial integrity that was signed by the United States, by Russia, by England, by the European countries. And that was the deal at the end of the Cold War. Ukraine gave up the third largest nuclear weapon inventory in the world. They had at the end of that, at the end of the Cold War, enough weapons to incinerate everyone on Earth. And they gave that up in return for a promise. And so the fact that we haven't had Ukraine's back the way we should when they got attacked by Russia is simply not acceptable. And it's, I don't spend a lot of time criticizing President Obama, but when we got in a situation with Libya, who did give up their weapons, and this guy, Muammar Gaddafi was a bad dude, but he gave up his nuclear weapons. And so from my point of view, when he just said, okay, just go and hide out in Dubai or wherever the hell you want, but not have him die, because the reason he died was he gave up his nuclear weapons program. And that is for me, that's nuclear weapons. I spend a lot of time talking about it and thinking about it, because we argue about a lot of things in this country. Not one of them matters if we can't prevent nuclear war. And so this is there are many things to worry about, and that's one of the things I try to remind Congress of. And that for me is really almost the most important single fact about Ukraine that doesn't get talked about enough. And then there's just the moral thing. I think somewhere here I've got a Ukrainian flag here that I wear most of the time these days, a Ukrainian and American flag tied together. That's, it's going to be a source of eternal shame for our country that we did not have Ukraine's back when we had promised them and have not so far delivered. So anyway, I could probably talk more than I should have on that, but that's a big deal with me. But just to close also with the situation with Gaza, there are now apparently some Republicans who may be willing to sign on to something non-trivial to restrict the weapons. The last time we restricted weapons to Israel for violating international law was under George Bush the first. Okay, he actually shut off for a period of time all weapons to Israel. And that's something we haven't seen fit to use, but I think we have to, it's not okay. We actually have a law, it's called the Leahy Law, that says that we should not allow weapons that are delivered by the United States to be used in violation of international law. It's pretty clear that that's what's happened, and it's time to have serious enforcement of the Leahy Law. So.
Thank you so much. This is for both of you. There is a growing divide in our country, which is exacerbated by misinformation and echo chambers, especially online. What solutions do you see that protect First Amendment rights and that can help resolve this issue?
Well, so again, most of what I do is in the state of Illinois. I travel outside the country sometimes, but most of what I do is in the state of Illinois. And obviously, I'm 54. I'm old to my kids, but young to some. But I did not grow up with phones. I did not grow up with the internet. I grew up with going outside and talking to people. That's number one on my list, is trying to disconnect. So a lot of I think this discontent and the not getting along with people starts when people are young. So getting one of the things we're trying to do in Illinois is get the phones outside of the schools and get them off the internet, get them outside playing, that kind of thing. But then what do we do to stop misinformation online? That's a tough one, because you don't want to stop good information. You want to stop the bad stuff. And who decides what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong? And what I have found, the only thing that I found that actually works is trying to educate, especially kids, but adults too, and myself. I still do it every day. Try to educate myself on how to figure out what's right and how to figure out what's wrong. To do the research on who's saying what is being said and what's fake and what's not. And that's hard nowadays. I mean, I get texts on a regular basis from the tollway saying I owe them money, right? And I get emails from people saying that I just bought something with PayPal. None of this stuff, it looks real, but it's not real. And that's because, you got to sit down, you got to figure that stuff out. It takes a lot more work, right? It'd be great if we could just unplug all the bad people off the internet. We can't, right? Now, again, when I was younger, there was 3 and then 4 TV channels, and there was only certain places where you got your news and you could trust it. You also got to figure out where the news is that you can trust, right? There are right-wing and left-wing news. There are good news and bad news. You got to filter it out. And the point is to teach our kids and teach ourselves to filter out the good stuff, or filter in the good stuff and out the bad stuff. And that's, I think, the only way to do it. And then just me being, loving this country is getting out and talking to other Americans and figuring out what they believe and what they don't believe, and giving your worldview. Rockford's and Belvidere and this state line is a weird place, right? Hey,
don't insult my
That's
district
right.
like that.
That's right. Well, what I meant by weird was Republicans and Democrats have to work together. We have to be there in the same place. So Winnebago County's got a county board chair. Boone County's got a county board chair who both are Republicans, and I spoke to them both today, right? And we all have to work together, and that's what I see. And I think that's the way it used to be in the federal government, and I think it can be again with people like Congressman Foster, who are more worried about the issues than they are about being right, or who are more worried about what's good for the American people and what letter you have after your name. So I just think we have to put the work in. That's what we have to do.
Yeah, and it's tough. I think I very much resonate with what you said about starting with kids. I read about a school recently that one of the things they do is they take the whole classroom and they pair them up randomly, and then once a week, a pair of kids who don't know each other have to go out for a 1 mile walk together and then write an essay about what they talked about. And that would cause this fundamental skill of actually looking in someone's eye, which is a fading skill among lots of our young kids, and to look in someone's eye, talk to them, understand what they are saying and feeling, is something that, if you talk to neural scientists, a big part of our brain is dedicated to analyzing the facial expressions of people, and when that's atrophying, we're just doing everything online and getting fired up and flaming away. That's, we're performing an experiment on our children's brains and our entire population's brains with social media and with these screens that are always there. We have to just step back. It's also going to get worse, frankly, with artificial intelligence. There are all of these chatbots that people are becoming addicted to. And that every conversation they have, they say, I don't want to talk to a real person, I'll talk to my chatbot. And the problem there is the chatbot, even if it can be trained to tell you the truth, it cannot give you a balanced picture. Like we talked about the situation in Gaza recently. If you go onto TikTok, if there's an important thing, you can see videos of suffering Palestinians and suffering Israelis. But then you ask yourself, what's the right ratio of those? If you're just sort of browsing to, the casualty ratio is like 50 or 60 to 1. Maybe you should see 60 suffering Palestinians for every suffering Israeli. But the Israelis will tell you, well, look, we didn't start it. Maybe a different ratio. The actual number is 301. You'll see, on TikTok, you'll see 300 pictures of suffering Palestinians to 1 picture. And all of these are true videos. So it's not disinformation, it's a question of the balance and getting the balance right. And there isn't a scientific formula for what that ought to be. And so we just have to understand how we're going to make that work. Because, the truth of the matter is the internet is so big and our brains are so small that we are going to need an AI or some filter between us and the internet. The first time we ever did encounter that, there was the Google search engine, and it was this incredible thing that gave you this pristine list of most interesting links. And over time, you can see it's just been polluted by the money that come in. And I did this experiment a little while ago where I went to the Google, I got an anonymous browser, just go into incognito, you go to the Google homepage and you say, I want to buy a new cell phone, okay? And then you look at the 2 pages that Google produced for that, and just imagine the money that changed hands in exchange for my eyeballs in response to that simple question. And it tells you what goes wrong when something that ought to be simple, like internet search, gets polluted by the effect of money for decades. And then we're going to have that problem in spades with artificial intelligence. You're going to have robo-doctors, AI doctors, which are going to be great. They're already comparable in quality of advice to a human doctor. but they're going to start taking payments from drug companies to steer them into certain drugs. Okay, and so we're going to have to get ahead of that problem, and that's one of the things I'm working on in Congress, is trying to make sure we have reasonable rules. And I was not happy in the big beautiful bill, the House version of that we were just it was dumped on our desk in the middle of night and said, okay, everyone, Trump ordered all the Republicans vote for it, or you're going to get a primary opponent. Just shut up. They hadn't read it. And then one of the, I think it was Marjorie Taylor Greene, she when she saw that what she just voted for included a complete ban on any regulation of artificial intelligence. So that's what all the Republicans in the House voted, to ban any state from doing anything to defend people from artificial intelligence. Whether it, these non-consensual nudity apps that are happening, all these horrible things that are happening, that would be illegal under what the Republicans passed through the House. Well, I hate to say something nice about the Senate, but the Senate had one look at what the House passed on that, and it went down 99-1 of voting against this ban on AI regulation, because that's something that's going to have to be the states and the federal government working together to try to defend people against everything that's coming at us there. I think I'm coming up, one of my town halls coming up is going to be actually talking about AI, and that will be very interesting.
I would just say, just to add one more thing, Illinois has probably one of the strongest internet protection laws in the country. It's called BIPA, B-I-P-A. And what it does is it really does protect images, all biometric information, including fingerprints, including eye retinal scans, pictures on the internet. And with AI coming in with what it's going to do, that's something that is, we are the strongest state in the nation with that. So it's something we're very proud of.
And Dave has been one of the real leaders on that whole area. So you should be proud to be represented by him on that, because it's a big deal.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. The one that I've been holding here is about what can be done to protect immigrants who have been working in our country for years and have no violent criminal record.
And so the question is, what can be done, which is a different.
Yes.
There's what I would like to be done, and what we realistically can do with this Congress and this administration. And there's different groups of immigrants in different situations. The ones that we came very close to have a permanent fix for were those who have been working in the United States for decades, without any criminal history at all. And back in 2013, the Senate actually passed what's called comprehensive immigration reform, which had a tough but fair path to citizenship for those people who've been here without any criminal history, paid their taxes, and it had a long list of things they had to do. They had to pass a very strong background check. They had to pay back taxes. They had to pay a penalty for coming here and working against the law for all the years they'd been. But at the end of that, and at the end of I think it was 7 or 10 years more of good behavior, they would be allowed a path to citizenship. So a tough, but of course, Trump campaigned on saying that. Well, he said a number of things here. One of the things is that there were tens of millions of criminal aliens. All right, and so the problem that they're running into is there are not that many criminal illegal immigrants. There are some, and no one, Democrat or Republican, wants someone with a significant criminal history to be able to come into this country and stay. If you've done bad stuff, you have no path to citizenship and no path to staying here. But that's not most of the immigrants. Most of them just came here to work, right? A lot of them, actually want to return to their home country. They want to work here and for a while, and some of them want to, those that have had children want to stay here with their children and make their lives here. And so the problem that we're seeing right now, frankly, is they run out of criminals to find. They all of the people who are in jail, they're on a path to being deported, as they should if it's a real criminal history. And now they're having to go and conduct raids on people who are just trying to work and do their jobs. And it is heartbreaking to see the effect that is having on families. In an earlier time when all this was starting up, I talked to principals who were having to send kids, Hispanic kids, back from school because they were unvaccinated. In Illinois, it's illegal to send your kids to school without a set of vaccinations. And they didn't have them because their parents were afraid that if they got their kids vaccinated, that they would be detected by ICE and deported. And so this is a sort of just fear that's happening in these communities. Again, just to close with where we ought to be going on this, it's to just bring up the 2013 Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill. We came so close. The Senate passed bill with a strong bipartisan majority, and in the House, none of the Republicans would say they would go for it, but Luis Gutierrez, who was in the House, he and I would go around, we'd sort of tag teams a bunch of Republicans and got private commitments from them that if you can find a way for Speaker Boehner, the Republican Speaker, to bring this up, I would vote for this. Okay, I won't say I'll vote for it ahead of time. I'm going to catch hell if I do it, but you find a way to get Boehner to bring this up, and I will take a bullet once in my career to do the right thing and solve this problem. And had we done that, it would have changed history. But for a year and a half, Speaker Boehner was being threatened by the Freedom Caucus. And he said, if you bring up that bill, we will have a motion to vacate and you will be kicked out of the speaker. Exactly what happened to Kevin McCarthy. They were threatening him with that. And so for a year and a half, he had the ability to bring up this bill and change history. It would have passed by 30 votes because a lot of Republicans knew it was the right thing to do and just, Anyway, so this is, that deal I think is still available when I talk privately to Republicans. It's a tough but fair path to citizenship for people with a strong, and then at the end of that, you return to the rule of law, that you only can come and work here with a real work permit. We'd have real E-Verify enforcement. And so that's one of the things that we got wrong, is that we have this system where a lot of businesses, the only way they can survive is to sort of nod and wink and hire people that they know are undocumented, because the actual quota of the number of workers that can come into the United States is not what our economy needs. And so you have to adjust those. That was also done as part of this bill. And so that's why it has to be like one big beautiful bill, not to abuse that, a different big beautiful bill that actually would have solved this problem. And so in that deal, I think it's still available. We just have to find some way to, maybe we can get the great orange one to think he invented it. And then if he invented it, I'm happy if we call it the Trump, because we have to solve this problem. We know how to do it. We came damn close. And it has a lot of painful provisions for everyone. It had, oh, by the way, I think at the time, $20 billion to build the wall.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was going to be paid for by the penalty fees that people would have to pay if they had been working illegal in this country. So it's one way, I guess, that we could have gotten the Mexicans to pay for the wall, actually, with their penalty fees being used. But fine, that was the price of getting Republican votes, and it would have passed. And anyway, we just have to find a way to get back to that, which was probably the last time I can remember Congress almost really doing its job on something important.
Just from my perspective, the 68th district, I have people from, I think, 40 different nations, and I think all the different continents. And, some of them have immigration issues, some of them don't. I've been lucky enough to be at 2 immigration ceremonies where people became new citizens. And I will tell you, there's no one more patriotic than a new citizen. I mean, there's no one who cares more about this country than a new citizen. And I will tell you that people are scared to come to my office because they're worried about the Trump administration. When there's even a thought that ICE may be around, people scurry and get scared. These are people who are our neighbors. These are people who are our friends. So we need a strong border, for sure. And we need to have a path for the people who are here. But we also need to have something that works because even if we do have a path, it takes forever to become a citizen. It takes too long. There are people who are just good, people who want to come here. So as we all know now with the Secretary of State's office, when we want to go in to get a license, take care of everything, we have to go online and set up an appointment. By the way, if you're having trouble with that, come into my office. But it's like going into the Secretary of State's office website and looking for an appointment. And there's none there because there's no offices open, there's nothing you can do, and you're driving around without a license. You're illegally driving because there's no way for you to come get a license anymore. It's just like that. So we need to find a quicker way for good people to come into this country, because we are all from immigrants, all of us. None of us was here. I mean, even the Native Americans came over the Bering Strait. We're all new to this country, whether it be one, two. My great grandfather came over here, but some people in my office, they were born in Mexico and they came over here. Some were born in Yemen and came over here. That's who we are. We are, as JFK said, we're a nation of immigrants, and that's, I think, if we're going to be true to that creed, we have to make a system that works and works fast, and doesn't take decades and decades.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we need to get to one more
Okay.
question and to wrap things up. Sorry to interrupt, but I think these two that came through actually are a really great way to conclude. I'll read both of them, and they're kind of similar. What can we do to help you help us? What can we do to make a positive difference?
Oh, sure. Okay, to get involved in local politics, in politics really at any level. One of the things that is really neat about the United States is that you can make a contribution at any level. It's not like we have some big boss that's controlling everything at the very top. You can make a big difference in your local community. Some of the most contentious issues are at the smallest issues. Just zoning changes. They change people's lives when a city makes a decision on what's going to be built on this piece of property. And this, or school boards, will affect children's lives. And this is something where, you mentioned the immigrants that were being sworn in as citizens. Many of those are so excited that now I can actually, run for school board or this sort of thing. And they're some of the best contributors in the United States Congress are first-generation immigrants that come in. And some of the sort of hardest to control are also, but it's but it's great. That's really who we are. And so that's number one thing, to make sure that you understand everything that's happening in our democracy, because it only works well when you have multiple eyes on it, and that means everyone's eyes looking at it from all perspectives. So that's the biggest thing, and part of that's showing up at town halls like this. So I want to thank everyone here who showed up for that. It's a big deal. This is it's not just Norman Rockwell drawing pictures of town halls. This is who we are and who we ought to be. Thank you for that.
So I guess I would just echo that and say the only way you can, the best way you can help is to get involved, but also, go to your neighbor's house, make sure they're okay. Go walk around. COVID was tough, right? And we're all still I think a lot of us are still kind of dealing with that kind of being alone for a year. Getting more involved in the community, being more involved in your, library board, school board, just, getting together, having a neighborhood meeting, just being on your neighborhood board, from the smallest thing all the way, run for Congress, run for Senate, but be involved. But not against him. Not against him. Right. And also, most importantly of all, vote. The goal should be 100% participation. That should be it. And some of these municipal elections, some of these city elections around here are so low, I almost am embarrassed. Like, one of the aldermen in the last election got elected with 200 votes. That's just shouldn't be that way. People should get up and they should vote. They should be part of the process. If they don't vote, they're not being heard, and then they're going to get people that they don't trust because they're not being talked to. So get involved, but vote, vote, vote.
Hey, thank you. If you have any closing remarks.
Oh, sure. Well, I just want to thank everyone for showing out. We go to Washington and we sit there and have these big fights about budgets, and we move numbers around on spreadsheets and stuff. And it's easy to forget the real impact we have on people's lives. And so when it's events like this where I get to hear people's concerns that really help me do my job better. So I just wanted to thank you for being here. That's what this job ought to be about.
I want to say thank you too. I will tell you, this is my first time, and I want to say thank you to the Congressman for having me here. This is my first time having a town hall with a Congressman. And I've seen, and I'm sure you've all seen online, some of the vitriol that can happen in some of these things. I've been very impressed with everybody's questions are great. People have been great. I'm very proud of my community for coming out and being so not only involved, but also civil and listen. And I can see you're all engaged. So thank you for that. And, hopefully we can do this again. The more connection, the better. And also come to my office if you have any problems at all. And his office too.